I'm the president and CEO of the State Theater, and along with the Express Times and WFMZ television, we welcome you to this debate for the 15th congressional district for the position. And first I want to make some introductions. First, to my right, Martin Till, who's president, CEO, and publisher of the Express Times. On our panel, Joe Owens, who is the editor of the Express Times, James Flagg, editorial page editor, and Lynn Olenoff, staff writer. And my timekeeper to the left, who I kept wanting to introduce because he's got all the power tonight, is Jim Deegan, the managing editor at the Express Times. I'd like to introduce now our candidates in alphabetical order. First, Democrat John Callahan. Republican Charlie Dent. And Independent Jake Towne. And now a brief outline of the format. Questions will be posed by the panel to the candidates in alternating rotation. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the question, and we will continue in that sequence until we get to questions presented by the candidates to one another. That's approximately halfway through. We have only 2 rules for this discussion. 1, the candidates cannot interrupt each other during the time allotted to respond, and members of the audience are asked to refrain from applause or interaction during the course of the debate. Each candidate has supporters in the audience, and they're welcome to congratulate them after the event, please. The purpose of tonight's gathering is to hear directly from the candidates. First is a question for Mr. Callahan. We go to Mr. Owens.
Good evening. Mr. Callahan, critics say Pennsylvania has some of the worst roads in the nation and gets a disproportionately low share of federal transportation dollars. I can get on a train in New York City or Philadelphia, but can't connect to the Lehigh Valley by rail. With Pennsylvania trying to plug a $500 million transportation funding hole, what can the federal government do to help fix our transportation problems?
Well, Joe, I have to agree with you. I think that the state of our roads and our bridges in Pennsylvania are bad, and I think that the case has been made time and time again that we have more deficient bridges in Pennsylvania than perhaps any state in the union. And so I think as a congressman, I would fight for more transportation funding for the state of Pennsylvania. You mentioned rail, and specifically passenger rail service to the Lehigh Valley. And, this is the third largest region of the Lehigh Valley, one of the fastest growing, or the state, one of the fastest growing areas of the state of Pennsylvania. And I think we should move towards passenger rail to both Philadelphia and to New York. The fact that you can take a train from Lancaster to Harrisburg, but you can't take one from the Lehigh Valley to New York City, is wrong. And I would work hard as a congressman in Washington to make sure that we would move towards developing a plan that made sense, that was sustainable, and I think you can satisfy a lot of urban and public policies by locating those train stations in our downtowns and out in Easton, Allentown, and Bethlehem, and we could do some good things for the Lehigh Valley with rail service.
Mr. Dent?
Yeah, thank you. First, serving on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, one thing we need to do is reform process. If you get federal dollars for a federal highway project, you get a federal process. And it takes many, many years. We call it the 12-year plan, and we don't call it the 12-year plan for nothing. What we need to do is deal with transportation projects like the one in Minnesota where the bridge collapsed at I-35. What we need to do is make sure that we can build a bridge. In that case, it took 437 days. We treated it as an emergency. We need to treat infrastructure like an emergency. Reform this process so once you get money, the stimulus which my opponent supported, what they've done is they've made it very difficult to spend federal dollars for infrastructure. You just can't spend the money fast enough. With respect to rail, now that the Big Dig project up the tunnel in New York has been canceled by Governor Christie, that we're going to the Hudson River, that will open up more opportunities from rail, from High Bridge into Phillipsburg. My opponent, he has deconverted rail lines in Bethlehem for rail trails, make it very difficult to bring rail service back to the valley.
Mr. Towne.
Sure. I think the whole problem with the federal dollars is that when the taxpayer is paying money to the federal government, they're not getting anything back in return. So on the federal and state, on the local and state levels, that would be best to address it. But we should also take a look at our entire railway system and what some folks in the audience may not be aware of. Our nation has a nationally owned railroad company called Amtrak that was nationalized back in the 1970s and continues to operate at a loss every single year. And I think that one of the solutions to the problem that you just mentioned would be to privatize that, sell off the assets, and let entrepreneurs buy it and start making a profit. I think that, again, having the government, too much government involvement in transportation is not quite necessarily a good thing. And if you're interested in the scientific reason why Pennsylvania has such bad roads, and will always have such bad roads, it's because in the Commonwealth we have the highest number of freeze-thaws every year. So we do have to permit larger than normal tax dollars in order to cover our roads at the state and local level. Thank you.
Mr. Flagg, a question for Mr. Dent.
Let's talk about earmarks. Everyone opposes them for inflating the budget deficit and building bridges to nowhere, yet everyone in Congress fights to bring them home. Mr. Dent, you've sponsored millions in earmarks for Lehigh Valley projects, and you're all for reducing the federal debt. So which is it? Do you swear off earmarks to take the high road, or keep carving out the bacon and the pork chops because we all like that taste so much? You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, first, let me be very clear about earmarks. I've supported the moratorium. There are no earmarks this year. I'll continue to support that moratorium. I believe the earmarks will be eliminated if the Republicans do take the majority. We get a lot of pressure from our constituencies for earmarks. In fact, Mayor Callahan's office submitted a request for 14 earmarks from my office this year. No one's getting any this year. But when we have used them generally largely for infrastructure projects and others. But I support the moratorium. I think it's an important thing. There needs to be more transparency and accountability. And I can assure you that that will happen should there be a new majority in Congress.
Mr. Towne?
Sure. On earmarks, I think that in general, a lot of the spending that the federal government does, they don't clearly delineate a lot of those things. I think offering amendments to the bills so that instead of having a blanket, $30 billion of spending, be good. It is kind of good to have these delineated in list form. But in terms of what you're referring to, the earmarks in Congress, the abuse and everything, I would also act to get rid of it. And I think the amendments before the bill is voted on should be done with.
Mr. Callahan.
This is an example of again where Washington has failed. You're right. Charlie has supported millions of dollars in earmarks, many of which are for his donors to his campaign. He was called out for this in a New York newspaper. One of the few congressmen in all of the country called out for supporting earmarks for his contributors. And I think, and I'll give you some egregious examples of that. It's bad enough that we had an $850 billion no-strings-attached bailout of Wall Street, but at the end of the day, we had a $700 billion bailout that Charlie voted against because he said in the paper that it was going to expose taxpayers unnecessarily at the expense of taxpayers and an exorbitant bailout for Wall Street. The only difference between the $700 billion bailout that Charlie voted against and the one that he voted for 4 days later was it was loaded with $150 billion of pork. $192 million for rebates to the Puerto Rican rum industry, and $2 million for toy arrows for children. That's Charlie Dent's record on earmarks.
Ms. Olenoff, a question for Mr. Towne.
The debate over Don't Ask, Don't Tell has been going back and forth in the courts in recent weeks, but President Obama says it's an issue he wants Congress to address. What's your position about allowing gays to serve openly in the military?
Thank you. That's a great question. And what I believe is that a service member's sexual preference just really has no bearing whatsoever on their ability to defend the nation. And I support repealing Don't Ask and Don't Tell. What I'd like to add in terms of the bailouts, both of the opponents that I'm facing currently, Congressman Dent, Mr. Dent has voted for the bailouts. And while Mr. Callahan says that he is also against bailouts, he was supported the first version of the bailout. So really, in terms of bailouts, what we have is a very clear delineation. I myself am against taxpayer-paid bailouts of private corporations.
Mr. Callahan.
Well, let me make it clear. I've never supported the Wall Street bailout. I will tell you this in terms of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I do think that this policy needs to be ended. I agree with the Secretary of Defense. I agree with our Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, that this is a policy that should end, and it should end now. I don't think that the men and women who are proudly serving and defending our country in the military ought to have to do it under a lie. And so I think it's high time that this policy end, and as a member of Congress, I would vote to end it.
Mr. Dent.
I believe this policy needs to be reformed and needs to be changed, but Secretary Gates and Admiral Mullen, they want to change, but they don't want to change now. We are going through a very serious review by the Defense Department. We're interviewing probably hundreds of thousands of troops about this policy, how to change it, because it'll have some impacts on readiness, recruitment, retention, and we want to make sure we get it right before we make any changes. That's very clear, but first we must hear from the troops about how we should go about making the change. That review will be brought back to us in December. We should take in that input before we make any serious changes. By the way, the earmarks that he had requested, he did request 14 from my office this year, and he also has included the R&D tax credit now as pork, as he refers to the TARP, which he supported. Then he said he didn't support, but very clearly he has supported. He is now calling the R&D tax credit alternative minimum tax relief for taxpayers as pork. I think you should hear that. That's and an earmark.
Mr. Flagg, a question for Mr. Callahan.
The cap-and-trade program has been criticized as unaffordable and an unfair tax on developed nations, especially the United States. Do you support it? And if not, how do we begin to counter the effects of climate change?
I do not support cap and trade. I think this is an important area where I differ from the Democratic leadership. We have led on this issue in the city of Bethlehem. We reduced our greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprints in the city, but we've done it through taking advantage of incentives. I think we in the federal government can offer more carrots and less sticks to get both the private sector and the public sector to operate more efficiently. We've done it in the city of Bethlehem. We've saved millions of dollars to the taxpayers of the city by operating more efficiently, and we've done the right thing by the environment. So I don't agree with cap and trade. I don't think it's the right policy to get us to our end goal, and I think it has a very real possibility of costing jobs. So I do not support cap and trade. I do believe in climate change. I think it's real, and I think the federal government can play a role in incentivizing, as I said, corporations and the government and the public sector to operate more efficiently to the benefit of taxpayers and to the benefit of the environment.
Mr. Dent.
First, I do oppose the cap and trade legislation that came through the House. It will raise electric rates. It will raise natural gas bills. It will raise prices of gasoline and diesel at the pump. It is a mistake. It will particularly punish Pennsylvania and other agricultural and industrial heartland states that are much more coal-dependent and carbon-reliant. It's a mistake. I just have to correct one thing that Mayor Callahan said. He actually does support cap and trade. He supported the mayor's climate protection pledge. He signed it, and it calls for a flexible market-based system of tradable allowances among emitting industries. That's cap and trade. So Mayor Callahan supports cap and trade, but candidate Callahan opposes cap and trade. He signed it. He also said he supported the Kyoto Protocols, which were rejected by the United States Senate 95-0, plus taxes on natural gas and oil to the tune of $22 billion.
Mr. Towne.
Sure. I also, I guess we're in concurrence here. I also do not support cap and trade. I believe that it is at its heart a Goldman Sachs-sponsored scheme that will create a false market based on this whole carbon credit system. I think that one of the greatest environmental possible impacts to our area is the issue of hydrofracking, which is taking place all over the, not in our particular district, but in the rest of the nation, in the rest of the state. And on that issue, I think that what we need to do on the state level and also on the federal level, I've asked Congressman Dent to support the FRAC Act, which would remove what is known as the Halliburton loophole, so that the drilling can be regulated by the Safe Water Drinking Act on the state level. And I think that also we need to take a look at is putting in place surety bonds so that when these corporations, if they do pollute the environment, that they will not cause damage to our residents and drinking water.
Ms. Olenoff, a question for Mr. Dent.
Earlier this year, you voted against the major federal health care reform bill. If reelected, will you seek to repeal the act, reform the act, or let it stand?
Well, I did vote against that health care law for a whole variety of reasons. One, it drives up health care costs. It's going to drive up the deficit. While it may provide additional coverage, it will not provide access to many people who will need it. It takes a broken Medicaid system and expands it to 133% of poverty. Yes, I do support a repeal, replace, and reform strategy. I would simply, first, certain things have to go. The employer mandate. There are 20 new or higher taxes in this law have to go. We're going to have to eliminate that individual mandate. The cuts in Medicare, $500 billion worth of cuts in Medicare. This program, when fully implemented, you have $500 billion in tax increases, $500 billion in Medicare cuts, $1 trillion entitlement, and when fully implemented, this plan will cost $2.6 trillion. it is going to explode the deficits. Despite what you're going to hear from my opponent here, it is going to explode the deficits, and we need to replace this with medical liability reform, cross-state purchases, health and wellness initiatives and incentives, and there are a whole myriad of things. Deal with health care reform as a process, not one big deal that's jammed through with Cornhusker kickbacks and all kinds of other shady deals.
Mr. Towne.
Sure. What Mr. Dent has failed to mention that he also supports H.R. 5424, which will put in place the Reform Americans Can Afford Act. And the whole thing is that what this will do is it will establish universal access programs that are very similar in place to what's currently put in place by the Democrats, and it will be usurping state sovereignty with the use of taxpayer money to provide corrupt state innovation programs. Again, Congress, and whether it's Republicans or Democrats, what they are not addressing is the state-sponsored health care insurance cartels. And this has been going on for quite some time, since the HMO Act in 1973. I agree that what we do need to remove is the individual mandate that every citizen must purchase insurance from the government, and I object to also changes in the labor laws that will devastate the poor and the middle class. I support market-based reforms such as tax relief legislation, removal of state portability barriers, a sound currency, tort reform, and removal of the very expensive state mandates which control 15 to 40% of our premiums. Thank you.
Mr. Callahan.
I think this is another example of where Charlie Dent has failed us. He went to Washington in 2004 and he said that health care would be issue one for him. That's what Congressman Dent said 6 years ago. And he's done nothing. It's a lot of talk and very little in the way of results and very little in the way of actions. Healthcare premiums have risen since 2000 by 129%. They've risen since he got into Congress by 34%. You all know that. You all know that the current system was unsustainable, both for employers and for individuals. Something had to be done. And Charlie Dent refused to take any action. Whether it's transportation funding, he sits on the transportation committee, he talks about process, he talks about all the things that we should do. He's been there for 6 years. What has he done? When is he going to take accountability for his record? Near as I can tell, Charlie's taken their money, $400,000 of health insurance company monies. He's done nothing to improve the health care system in the time that he's been in Congress. I will do better.
Mr. Owens, a question for Mr. Towne.
Mr. Towne, tell us the method to be used for the U.S. to get out of Afghanistan and how one congressman from the Lehigh Valley can help make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that having an independent in the United States Congress will be quite important. And I think that the greatest threat to our national security is the national debt. It's not some boogeyman living in a cave in Pakistan. And what I support is getting our troops out of harm's way. I do not support these. We've lost over 5,700 soldiers, as well as quite a bit of expenses. Like we're literally bleeding our nation dry. And the way to go about addressing these criminals that caused 9/11 is with small military groups to procure them and bring them back as criminals for a court of law. We've been doing this for the past 9 years. It's not working. We have not secured our own borders. That's another thing that I would act to do, and use our military to control the borders, and for the access points, whether it's airports, seaports, and highways, to use our Customs and Border Patrol. Thank you.
Mr. Callahan.
There's no question that the war in Afghanistan, which is in its ninth year, the longest war in American history, has taken a tremendous toll on the men and the women of our armed forces. And so I agree with the December review that's going to take place by the generals. I think that any decision to draw down our forces, the goal right now is the middle of next year, should be based on the recommendations of the generals and by the conditions on the ground. But most importantly, I think we need to take care of our veterans when they get back from Afghanistan, when they get back from Iraq. And Charlie Dent has not done that. Charlie Dent has repeatedly made votes that have cut benefits to veterans. And in fact, on May 11, 2005, he voted against the bill that would allow widows and orphans of our troops to receive their full benefits after their loved ones were killed in combat. It's not just about going to the hospitals. It's about supporting them, supporting the widows, and supporting the orphans and our troops when they come home from Afghanistan and from Iraq.
Mr. Dent.
Well, first, John, shame on you. Really, shame on you. Veterans Health has almost doubled since I've been a member of Congress. I voted for every one of those Veterans Health Appropriations bills. I'm the candidate who was endorsed by the Veterans of Foreign Wars Political Committee. You can shake your head no, John, but that is a fact. I'd be happy to give you the letter. You can have it. That's your endorsement.
Vote, Charlie.
Oh, but I'd be happy to give it to you. That said, this is my time. That said, I've also been given an A rating in 2008 by the Iraq-Afghanistan Veterans of America. You'd never know that to hear John Callahan. He even puts pictures of soldiers with bloody cheeks and says we're somehow hurting them. Well, I've been to every combat hospital in Afghanistan and Iraq. I visited our troops. I've gone to those services, too, of those who gave that last full measure of devotion. I take that very seriously. And on Afghanistan, I want to say one thing. I did meet with our generals, Petraeus, Admiral Mullen, and others, and look, the timeline the President has set down has created problems. I think the policy overall makes sense, but this has created enormous problems. It has sent mixed signals to friend and foe alike. They believe we're about to run out, and I think we have to be very clear about what our objectives are. We need more collaboration from the Pakistani government to deal with some of the safe havens of al-Qaeda and particularly the Taliban. We must deal with that.
Ms. Oldenoff, a question for Mr. Callahan.
Congressman Dent has called you a liar who is betraying Bethlehem taxpayers. Well, you say he has no concern for the middle class and has turned his back on our injured soldiers. What do these negative portrayals add to this race?
Look, I'm proud of my record as mayor. I think my record is very clear, whether it's on job creation and driving $2 billion of economic investment in the time that I've been mayor that's resulted in more than 5,000 new jobs in the city, and whether it's reducing $60 million of debt in the time that I've been mayor, balancing budgets and cutting government waste. That's my record. I'm proud of it. We're in a campaign. We're going to compare each other's records. I think the question that everybody has to ask themselves is do we want to go back to the failed economic policies that got us here in the first place? Charlie Dent has been a member of Congress for 6 years. He's been a part of the problem. He's why we're in the mess that we're in. So we've got to act. And so I'll talk about my record, and I think it's high time that Charlie Dent talk about his record and defend his record, because I hear him talk about Washington as if he hasn't been there for the last 6 years. So I think it's fair to make those comparisons, and I think ultimately November 2nd, people will have the opportunity to make their choice.
Mr. Dent?
Sure. Well, when it comes to accountability, John Callahan takes no accountability for anything that goes on in Bethlehem. An $8.5 million deficit, an administration that doesn't pay its bills, budgets that are patchworks of one-time revenues that pay for recurring expenditures, money's moved illegally. These are the findings of their independent auditors, and he won't even admit it. The big refrain in Bethlehem is, where's the mayor? He's AWOL. He's simply not doing his job. So when he talks about accountability, look in the mirror. He really should. Again, look, an election is a choice among candidates. He's made a lot of claims that have really gone unchallenged. He says he's created 5,000 jobs. He didn't create 5,000 jobs. It's laughable that he would say these things. But we have to talk about accountability, and I'm happy to stand on my record. He is the candidate of the Washington agenda. Hey, Joe Biden is coming here because he wants John Callahan to endorse and rubber stamp his agenda. He's not coming here so that he wants you to go to Congress to vote against him. You supported him on stimulus. You're the candidate of the Washington agenda that has been so widely repudiated by so many people, whether it was on the failed stimulus, the health care law. Now you're saying you're against cap and trade when you were for it. So, let's be honest about this, John. You're the candidate of the Washington agenda. I've been fighting against it.
Mr. Towne?
Sure. In the United States, what we have is a two-headed one-party system, and both the Republicans and the Democrats have really failed the American people. What I believe, and I think the reason why you see so much negative campaigning is because they don't really have any new and original ideas. They're just recycling the same old failed policies over the last couple decades and throwing them out as something new. For instance, Mr. Callahan's jobs plan is just recycling the same points that Mr. Dent made in his 2008 election campaign. And I think that it's time for new ideas. One of the ideas that I have to deliver accountability and transparency is called our open office. And the way our open office will work is anytime any resident in the area would like to comment on any House floor bill, they can do so either by phone, by mail, or online. I'll read through it. It'll be open and transparent to the public. And then what I'll do afterwards, I'll tell you not just why I voted on, not just how I voted on every single bill, but also why I voted. So that way you always have a record. And if you ever disagree, you'll be able to go back and say, Jake, I disagree with you on this. And this is something you have not seen from Mr. Dent in his 20-year political career, and you're not going to see it from Mr. Callahan as well. Thank you.
Mr. Owens, a question for Mr. Dent.
Mr. Dent, economists have said the U.S. officially entered a recession in December 2007 during the Bush administration. Why should anyone believe Republicans have a plan for making the economy better?
Well, I think you've seen what's happened with the plan that has been presented to us so far, failed stimulus. Well, first, I'll talk about jobs. I think what things we ought to do, we have to have faith in the private sector to create jobs. I mean, John really supports more of the statist approach. If the government simply spends more money, gets more involved in more aspects of our lives, that will grow the economy. I disagree. I believe what we need to do is give small businesses a 20% deduction on income, which was suggested at the time of the stimulus but rejected, because those small businesses will create jobs at a much lower cost, and they'll create them more efficiently, and they will be more sustainable. That's one thing. In fact, I was just at Air Products today and met with a few hundred of the workers out there. In fact, point one of John Callahan's plan to close loopholes will actually cost Air Products tens of millions of dollars. It's a massive tax increase on American business, particularly American manufacturers who export. It will kill jobs here and send American headquartered companies to relocate to countries like Ireland. It is a huge and alarming fiasco and the centerpiece of his plan. Also, we need to extend the R&D tax credit, make sure that we extend these current tax rates for all taxpayers to give predictability and stability to those who want to invest.
Mr. Towne.
Sure. Governments do not create sustainable jobs. Only people do. And what we need to take a harsh look at is all the tax, labor, and regulatory laws that the government has put in place, and just ask ourselves one very simple question: does this encourage or discourage employment? And if it discourages employment, you need to consider amending it or getting rid of it. Locally, we've seen here the unemployment rise from 5 to 10%. The true national debt of our country, when Mr. Dent took office, was $7.5 trillion. It is now 13.6. We need to have we need to take an axe to the federal budget and really reduce the spending that's going on. And we also need to realize that the unfunded liabilities for the Social Security and the Medicare programs per the United States Treasury is $107 trillion. When you add up the true national debt, it comes out to be about $400,000 for every man, woman, and child. And what it's adding up to is this huge bubble in the dollar and the Treasury market. And when people, eventually go to the bank and try to get money, we're going to be hit with a lot of problems. And one of the things I favor is a temporary income tax holiday to let people keep what they earn, and to take. Thank you,
Joe. I'll answer your question. We have no reason to believe that sending Charlie Dent back to Washington will result in anything more than more lost jobs. Charlie Dent's record on jobs is clear. He supported the failed economic policies that led to the recession in the first place. That recession, the Wall Street meltdown, he was there for the deregulation of Wall Street, he was there for the bailout of Wall Street, and he stopped accountability of Wall Street every step of the way. This recession has resulted in the loss of over 8 million jobs in this country, 18,000 jobs right here in the Lehigh Valley alone. So once again, do we want to go back to the failed economic policies that got us here in the first place? That's Charlie Dent's jobs plan. My jobs plan is clear. I've talked a lot about jobs. I've done it in Bethlehem. We've had $2 billion of investment, creating the right environment for private sector to thrive, for small businesses to thrive and invest, and that has led to more than 5,000 jobs. We did it in Bethlehem. We can do it again in the Lehigh Valley. We can do it again in this country. And I really encourage all of you to visit CallahanJobsPlan.com to get a closer look at the plan.
This is the final question of the first half of our debate. Mr. Flagg, a question for Mr. Towne.
The members of the Westboro Baptist Church have protested in the Lehigh Valley and continue to picket the funerals of soldiers, saying that God is punishing the United States for tolerance of homosexuals. Do these people deserve protection under the First Amendment?
Yeah, under the United States Constitution, people have the right to assembly and the right to free speech. However, as a federal congressman, there is no right to infringe upon that given in the United States Constitution. On the state and local levels, if people want to decide for something in that, for cemetery ceremonies that are private, they could easily decide. But in terms of, we might not agree with what everyone says, but what we need to do is defend the right of people to say it if we are to live in a free and open society. What we have all too often from career politicians in D.C. is a policy where they just do not suffer dissent. And it might hurt it sometimes to hear these types of dissent, but that's what we need to fight for if we are to have a free and open society. Thank you.
Mr. Callahan.
I think we do have to protect one's right for freedom of speech. But when it comes to human rights, when it comes to discrimination, I've put forth legislation just in the last couple of months to form a human relations commission within the city of Bethlehem to prevent discrimination within the city based on folks' ethnicity, based on their age, based on their disability, and yes, including based on their sexual preference. And so my record's clear on this issue and is a different record than Congressman Dent.
Mr. Dent.
Yeah, the question, John, was about those people in Kansas who come and so offensively picket at funerals of soldiers who've been killed. You know, I went to the 5th anniversary of the 9/11 celebration out in Shanksville. I went out with the Sugars, Bill and Elle Sugar. Their son Bill was killed in New York. And I remember those signs. So offensive. I mean, I just couldn't imagine what I had to ask Mrs. Sugar, please, look away. Don't look at these horrible signs. Yes, those individuals have First Amendment rights, those people from Kansas, from that church. But you know what? What they're doing is harassment. It is harassment. It is wrong. When people go to a funeral and picket and say just the most outrageous things, and it's so offensive and harmful. I've been to the services of several of our soldiers who've given that last full measure of devotion, as I said earlier. And I'm very proud that so many of our veterans groups, with the motorcyclists, they go there and they basically ring the funerals to make sure that the families can grieve, you know, in a very appropriate and thoughtful way, and not to be harassed by these radicals. I mean, when does the First Amendment end, and when does harassment? When does it become harassment? I think what we're witnessing is harassment.
Thank you very much. That's the first portion. And now the candidates' questions to each other. And this will be approximately 24 minutes, the rest of the debate. Each candidate in this portion of the debate is given an opportunity to ask questions of another candidate. Questions must be addressed to one candidate only, and that candidate has 1 minute to respond. Rebuttal time is not allowed in this period. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to make a closing statement at the end of the debate. First, Mr. Towne.
Sure, thank you. I have promised to accept only the district's median household income of $58,000 and donate the remaining $116,000 after taxes to local nonprofit hospitals so it is spent helping those who need it the most. I've also pledged to not enlist in the lucrative congressional pension or health care plans. In this depression created by the reckless spending and money printing by the government, everyone is cutting back, and it only makes sense that public servants should not be making 4 times the nation's median household income. So, Mr. Callahan, after having attacked Mr. Dent for pocketing $37,000 in pay raises over the past 6 years, why will you not pledge to take a pay cut from your $174,000 salary, not take the pension, and pay for your own health care just like everyone else?
Well, Jake, I think I'd agree with you that if you look at the results of Washington over the course of the last 6 years, particularly our congressman, we're not getting our money's worth right now, that's for sure. Congressman Dent has raised the debt by more than $3 trillion. He's given Wall Street an $850 billion bailout and tax breaks to companies that are outsourcing our jobs. But, to your question, Jake, I would be open to something like that. Let's be clear about, I make $80,000 a year. It's a fine salary, and I'm proud of the salary. But to sit back and listen to Congressman Dent, I mean, only in Washington would someone who makes twice what you make criticize you for your salary. He makes $174,000 a year. In the course of the last 6 years, he received over $1 million of taxpayer salary. And he's accepted $37,000 of pay raises while cutting widows and orphans' benefits. So, Jake, I would be open. I think that I would not accept an increase in pay. I will say this, at least until we return back to the unemployment rates and employment rates before this recession.
Mr. Dent, you may ask a question.
Yeah, my question is to John Callahan. After the health care bill was jammed through the House and the Senate, and the House by Speaker Pelosi, you said that you would have voted for the bill and that you support it. Since I'm sure you did not read the bill, because few of the people who voted for it did, John, would you please name 5 of the 20 new or higher taxes in the health care law that you support?
Look, Charlie, I'm not going to stand here and play trivia games with you. You were against the bill before the bill was drafted, okay? And you were against the bill a year and a half before there was a bill, okay? So I've been supportive of health care. I was outside your office months before the bill was passed in support of health care reform because, again, we all recognize that we had an issue and we had a problem in this country that Charlie Dent said would be issue one when he went there and did nothing about it, other than collect $400,000 from the medical insurance companies while your premiums went up, your benefits went down, and their profits increased. So I'm proud of where I stand. I've supported health care reform because I recognize that the current system was unsustainable.
Mr. Callahan, you may ask a question.
My question is for Congressman Dent. Charlie, at the last debate, I asked why you voted against full survivor benefits for widows and orphans of troops that were killed in combat. The issue came up again this evening, and you refused to answer the question. I have the vote here. It's a vote that you made May 11th, 2006, which cost widows on average $60,000 of more than 60,000 widows. You didn't answer the question in that debate. Could you please explain to the widows of our soldiers why you cast that vote? I think that they deserve an answer.
Sure, John. I'd be happy to answer that question. You're trying to find obscure procedural votes.
It's not procedural.
John, this is my time to answer. Let's be very clear about this. I voted the same way that Sam Johnson voted. You know who Sam Johnson is? He's the most heavily decorated member of the U.S. House of Representatives, a 7-year prisoner of war. What you're saying is that Sam Johnson and I have turned our backs on our soldiers, our veterans, and their families. That is what you are saying. And don't interrupt me, because I know you're about to. So I want to be very clear about that. That is the reality, John. And, as I said, I have supported the new GI Bill of Rights for our soldiers who are returning, who want to get educational benefits. I want to make sure they can transfer those benefits, to their spouses or family members if they can't use that benefit. I mentioned earlier, veterans' health funding has nearly doubled since I've been. I voted for every one of those veterans appropriations bills. I work with local companies on developing remedies for tinnitus or tinnitus, ringing of the ears. We've worked with other companies as well, locally, to try to help our folks. A veteran center in Allentown to help with homeless and substance addicted veterans, trying to help them, doing things. You've never talked about veterans or our troops until you started sending out nasty mail.
Mr. Towne.
Sure. Mr. Callahan, in 2006, your party was elected to a landslide victory to end the undeclared and unconstitutional war in Iraq, but then failed to deliver on this promise, and instead expanding the Afghanistan war, causing the deaths of 5,774 American soldiers and wounding well over 33,000 service members in Iraq alone, as well as many tens of thousands of innocent civilians. Meanwhile, the size of the VA has mushroomed from $45 billion in 2001 to $125 billion this year. I will drive for rapid, immediate, and orderly withdrawal of all troops from both Iraq and Afghanistan and redeployment to protect our borders. Will not approve a single dollar to extend these military occupations. And my question for you is, why do you wish to continue the war on terror, bankrupting our nation and placing our troops in harm's way? And how can the people in the district expect you to make your own decisions after all the visits and financial backing by the special interest groups and establishment politicians like Mr. Biden and Ms. Pelosi, who also support these wars?
Jake, I will tell you that I think we need to remember why we're in Afghanistan. I think we all recognize that 3,000 folks died on a Tuesday because they decided to go to work that day. We are still a nation at war. There is a very real threat out there, and we need to go to all of the areas, Afghanistan and Iraq, and throughout the globe where Al-Qaeda and terrorists mean to do us harm. We're all encouraged by the end of combat, the combat mission on Iraq. I think it shows that we are on the right track. As I talked about earlier today, I support the December review by the generals and the progress that we're making in Afghanistan and the putting forth of a timetable next year for the responsible withdrawal from Afghanistan. And again, it's got to be based on the conditions on the ground. It's got to be based on the recommendations of the generals.
Mr. Dent.
Question? I have my question. Okay, John, you've tried to take credit for jobs created by others in Bethlehem. You said you created 5,000 jobs as though the actual businesses responsible for those jobs had nothing to do with them. Here are the facts, John. When you took over as mayor in January 2004, Bethlehem's unemployment rate was 6.8%. It currently stands at 11%. In January of 2004, there were 32,082 people employed in Bethlehem, and in August 2010, there were 31,377 people employed in Bethlehem. I have the Department of Labor statistics to back that up. How can you possibly claim to have created 5,000 jobs in Bethlehem when there are now over 600 fewer people employed in Bethlehem than when you became mayor? And why don't you account for jobs lost?
So, Charlie, you're going to...
Where are the 5,000?
You're going to put it... Can I answer the question?
Yes, we'd love to hear it.
Thank you. You're clearly not paying a lot of attention. What I have talked about is the fact that we have created the right environment in the city of Bethlehem, recognized by Fortune Small Business as one of the 100 best places in the country to launch a new business in 2008. We have created the right environment, and it's city programs that were cited by Fortune Small Business as to why we've created that environment and the good that we've done. I don't take all the credit, Charlie, but what I'm saying is we collectively have created the right environment for the private sector to thrive and to invest in the city of Bethlehem to the tune of $2 billion, and that investment has resulted in 5,000 jobs in the city of Bethlehem. Those are the facts. Again, your job record, Charlie, and I will put my record of job creation and economic growth against yours in the last 6 years in Washington any day of the week. It's 8 billion lost jobs and 18,000 lost jobs, not to mention your support of trade policies that have cost Pennsylvanians 50,000 manufacturing jobs. It's time you start taking some accountability for that, Charlie.
Mr. Callahan? Mr. Callahan, you can ask a question.
Yes. I will ask my question of Jake. Yes. Jake, do you think... I thought you should get some time. I'm happy you're at the debate at all, Jake. Jake, do you think that we should eliminate the Department of Education? Where would that leave disabled children and programs like Head Start, which I took advantage of as a small kid?
Sure. On the question of the Federal Department of Education, what you need to realize, Mr. Callahan, is that we already have 50 state departments of education that comply by providing dollars to our local school boards. And when a local school board needs to go to the federal government and need to ask for money, it creates quite a bit of problems. So the whole thing is to get back to following the Constitution. The Department of Education has only been around for the past 30 years, and if you talk to a lot of students and educators in the region, what they'll tell you is that it leads to people teaching the tests, and it's just not what's best for the students. So I am very much for education. I do believe that on the local and state level, that's where the answers lie, and when your tax dollars go to Washington, D.C., you shouldn't expect to see them back. And the budget of the Department of Education is $100 billion, and Pennsylvania's share of that is roughly somewhere around $2 billion. And I think that if we just kept that money here in Pennsylvania and decided to use it ourselves, we'd be much better off than trying to go along with all these federal programs that create a one-size-fits-all and create stagnation in our education. And take a look at all the results that we've had over the last 20 years.
Mr. Towne.
Sure. My question is for Mr. Dent. Mr. Dent, as a 20-year career politician, you have sworn an oath to protect the United States Constitution multiple times. This document, especially with its 9th and 10th Amendments, greatly limit the powers of the federal government. I believe you have broken your oath innumerable times, but in the spirit of debate, can you please explain where in the Constitution do you have the right to free taxpayer-paid health care and pension benefits for the rest of your life, but your constituents do not? Where in the Constitution do you have the power to continue to authorize funding for undeclared and unconstitutional warfare? Where in the Constitution do you have the power to bail out private corporations with taxpayer-paid dollars? And where in the Constitution do you have the power to violate the Fourth Amendment rights of our citizens to authorize federal agents to commit warrantless wiretapping, secret searches, and nude body searches under citizens underneath the Patriot Act and other legislation that you have supported?
Well, there are a lot of questions there, Jake. Jake, you fancy yourself as quite the constitutionalist, but you kind of strike me more as an Articles of Confederation kind of guy. But nevertheless, having said that, when it comes to the war, you said with respect to the Afghanistan war, I heard you on a radio show, you said, what goes around comes around. That the United States had caused...
It's a CIA term, blowback.
I'm answering the question. You had stated that the United States was responsible for the attacks of 9/11, like a 9/11 truther. I couldn't disagree with you more.
I'm not a 9/11 truther, Charlie.
Well, I'm answering the question. You made the statement on the Bobby Gunther Walsh show. We all heard it. Patriot Act. The Patriot Act is very, very important to make sure that our intelligence agencies, as well as our domestic law enforcement, could collaborate. There was a wall separating them. That was very important. And you talk about invasions of privacy. Well, we have roving wiretaps right now for drug dealers. We simply said in counterterrorism operations, we should be able to use roving wiretaps on those same types of on terrorists. Nothing wrong with that. We should be doing it. It has helped make America safer. There has not been a successful attack, well, with the exception of the Fort Hood incident, there's not been a successful attack in this country since 9/11 because of that act and others.
Mr. Dent.
Sure. My question is going to be to John. You probably think I'm going to ask you about all the job-killing policies you support, like the health care law, card check.
A lot of jobs
card
in
check,
Washington, Charlie.
Card check, deny secret ballots, or cap and trade, the energy tax,
right.
Stimulus of Phil. But I'm not going to ask you that.
No, don't ask.
On April 21st of 2005, you made this statement at a candidates debate for mayor, and this is an exact quote. I would immediately be able to lower taxes and not have to raise them for a time. End quote. This was part of your casino sales pitch to the people of Bethlehem. You receive host fees for the casino since 2009. You haven't delivered the tax relief, the property tax relief that you promised. My question is on behalf of the taxpayers of the city of Bethlehem. Will there be a property tax cut in your 2011 budget? You failed to provide one in the 2010 budget.
I've been, again, very clear about this topic since 2006, and I did make that statement in 2005, and for those of you who are aware of the groundbreaking regional revenue sharing agreement that we brokered as a result of the gaming fees, is that, I made that statement before that revenue sharing agreement was approved. An agreement that will get $3 million to the city of Allentown, that will get $450,000 right here to the city of Easton, in addition to the host fees to the city of Bethlehem and the surrounding communities. So circumstances changed, and we did the right thing with those host fee dollars. But the fact of the matter is, in the last 4 years, and I was proud of helping Allentown and Easton, but the reality is, in the last 4 years, we have stabilized taxes in the city of Bethlehem. There has not been a tax increase in the city of Bethlehem in 4 years. Despite what you may read about or hear about in some of Charlie Dent's mail pieces. At the end of the day, it's the longest period of time in 30 years in our city's history that we haven't had a tax increase. That's my fiscal record. $60 million less debt, stable taxes, and no tax increase in 4 years, and cutting $10 million of government waste. And I'll put it up against yours, Charlie, any day of the week.
Mr. Callahan.
My question is for Congressman Dent. Charlie, Jake just a few minutes ago laid out an argument to abolish the Department of Education. Do you agree with him? And Charlie, would you agree with Jake, and should we eliminate the Department of Education?
John, no, I've never supported the elimination of the Department of Education. But like many federal bureaucracies, and to deal with our deficits, that department, along with others, are going to probably come under the budgetary knife come the new year. You talk a lot about tough fiscal choices, but we have to rein in spending, and $4.4 trillion is what's been added to the baseline spending since Nancy Pelosi became Speaker. She supports you. You support the policies, the health care law, the $2.6 trillion takeover of health care, the stimulus, unpaid for, over $1 trillion in financing. So we're going to have to make some very hard choices. I am prepared to do that. I don't know that you are. Again, my time. But that's the reality. Education, as we all know, is critical for our children. It is principally a state and local function. And as I said, the Department of Education is going to come under very close review, like every other department. And I suspect they're going to be asked to tighten their belts, like everybody else in this government.
Thank you, gentlemen. We've reached the end of that portion of the debate. Now it's time for closing remarks. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for a closing statement focusing on why voters should elect him to the 15th district seat. We'll begin with Mr. Dent.
Oh, thank you. As I've often said, an election is a choice among candidates, and you certainly have that choice here. But this election is also a referendum on the policies of the current administration, the Obama administration, and the Pelosi-led Congress and its failed leadership. You know, I've been blamed for a lot of things that have happened in Washington. Even at the same time, I voted against those very agenda items that my opponent, John Callahan, likes to talk about. I'm not the guy who's been handpicked by Washington to run for this seat. That was him. It was Joe Biden and Rahm Emanuel. So be very clear about that. But I do have a vision for this country on national security, on homeland security. I've developed a real leadership on issues of homeland security. I'm proud of that fact. Also on jobs. I've been very clear. We need to open up markets for American manufacturers, for American farmers. We need to provide predictability and stability to the tax code. We need to make sure that Washington is a friend. Instead of these angry arguments and fighting with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I mean, this is just these are ridiculous commentaries on what's happening in this country. There seems this is the most anti-small business agenda I've ever seen, and I've been fighting against that agenda. And again, I look forward to your support on November 2nd. I respectfully ask for your vote because we need a check and a balance against the excess spending, regulations, and job-killing policies coming out of Washington. We need that check and balance. We're certainly not getting it. We're going to need a divided government, people who can stand up to these reckless policies that are frightening people, scaring them. There are trillions of dollars sitting on the sideline. People are afraid to invest their money. Those who have it, they're afraid to invest it right now because they think Washington is going to make them pay more. We need to stop it right now, arrest it, and send a signal that Washington wants to help create. We want to provide the incentives for small businesses to create the jobs that we all need. Because people are struggling. They need our help. And Washington right now is failing them. He is the candidate of this Washington agenda. I've been opposing it. And I'm going to stand up and do the right thing for our people. Again, I respectfully ask for your vote on Tuesday, November 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Towne.
Sure. I have good news for everyone. The good news is the path to prosperity is quite simple. We just need to return to what America does best. America needs to restore our individual liberties. America needs to return to the rule of law per the Constitution. America needs balanced budgets with a sound currency to impose discipline on government. America needs very low taxes. And America also needs a very strong national defense while avoiding undeclared wars and nation-building missions. This November 2nd, you can vote for those who caused all this economic strife, or you can vote for a problem solver who has the solutions. I have more private sector experience than Mr. Dent and more industrial experience working abroad than Mr. Callahan. I'm the only candidate who has studied economics. When I am elected, I will be your public servant, your employee. My opponents offer the same old, failed policies that landed our country in this mess in the first place. These men subsist on political welfare, and their parties arrogantly expect your votes just because they have a D or an R next to their names. They are just peas from the same pod. It is like my father once told me, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. And what have the people of the 15th District received by voting for the Republocrats? More spending, more wars, more debt, and less liberty, fewer jobs, and less prosperity. Our two-headed but one-party political scene is not the sharp divide the politicians and the media want everyone to believe. The true difference between the Democrat and Republican politicians in power is no greater than the choice between picking Coke or Pepsi at a supermarket. For those who think you will be throwing your vote away by voting independent, nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. Your parties have betrayed you, your parties have lied to you, and your parties have let you all down. I humbly ask for your vote this November 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We have one more candidate. Mr. Callahan, it's your turn.
Folks, don't get fooled. For Charlie Dent to try to paint me as a Washington insider is laughable. I go to work every day in the city of Bethlehem. He goes to work every day in Washington, D.C. He can't change that fact. There have been more jobs created since January 1st in this country than the entire 8 years of the Bush administration. That's a fact, okay? Charlie won't talk about that. Charlie wants to think that we created jobs. during the Bush administration, that we created jobs in the time that he's been in Washington. Folks, you do have a choice. Charlie went as far in one of our previous debates to actually say that I made a vote in Congress, that I voted to support something. He so badly wants me to be the incumbent in this race. He knows that he has supported the failed economic policies that got us here in the first place, and he doesn't want to admit that. He wants to fool you. Don't fall for it. I ran for mayor of my hometown for one simple reason, and that was to make a difference in my community, to give something back to a community that gave me an awful lot growing up. It is that same motivation, it is that same spirit that drives me to run for Congress. I want to make a difference for the Lehigh Valley. There is a clear choice. There's a lot of talk about my record. Bethlehem's been rated as one of America's best places to live. Bethlehem's been rated as one of the 100 best places to raise a family. Bethlehem's been rated by Fortune Small Business in 2008 as one of the best places in all of the country to launch a new business. Those are facts, folks. We are the safest city in the entire state of Pennsylvania. That's a fact. Those are real results that have taken focus and energy to get done. We have a choice. We can go back to the failed economic policies of the past. A career politician that's been down there for the last 6 years that got us in this mess in the first place. Or you can vote for a Main Street mayor that's got it done in Bethlehem. I will roll up my sleeves and work every day for the Lehigh Valley. I think that Congress, I think that Washington and Wall Street have enough congressmen. I'm going to be a congressman for the Lehigh Valley. And I respectfully ask for your vote on November 2nd. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. You did a great job. Audience, thank you for allowing the gentleman to speak. We would tell everybody again, no matter if you're an R, a D, or an I, or whatever your affiliation is, make sure you vote on November 2nd. Just as an FYI, the Express Times will be using this debate for our endorsement for this race. Our endorsement will be published on this Thursday in the Express Times, so make sure you pick up your copy. And we thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.